Hokie hangover. Guys, season preview time. We made it. Off season's over. Andrew, Ricky, what's going on?
It is incredibly hard to believe that we have finally finished this long slog of an off season where I think it's because there's so much anticipation for this year that the off season has really felt like it has dragged on for what feels like a full calendar year. But yes, week 0 is here. There are football games on our TVs available to watch this weekend. Just not the Hokies, not quite yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you, Ricky. In off season that I guess technically started as we exited the stadium in Annapolis in the pouring rain after that big win. The feeling that we had in that stadium was, something of a high, and this fan base has been riding that high ever since. So, to finally be on the doorstep of reality on the turf, pads cracking, playing other teams, finally get to see one way or the other, over the course of a 12-game season, whether this hype that it seems like we've all bought into, over the course of the last 8 or so months, is going to amount to what we think it can, and that's really exciting.
Definitely fair to say there's some optimism. Would be a shame if something bad happened. Okay, here we go. I have 8. I have 8 roundtable questions, and I purposefully, we agreed about 15 minutes ago. I sent you guys a text message asking if you wanted me to reveal the questions beforehand. Ricky said no. Andrew, as usual, goes with the flow. Didn't care. So I'm going to ask a series of questions because it's really boring to go unit by unit, but I think through these questions we'll hit on all of them. So let's just do it that way. Let's do it that way, shall we? Let's start here. Through 2 seasons at Virginia Tech, Brent Pry is 10-14, right? Obviously, year 1 didn't go great. Last year, start of the year, real ugly. Got a lot better towards the end, obviously winning the bowl game. 10-14 with 1 bowl win, okay? Let's use one word or phrase, right? Because one word is hard, right? But let's use a word or a phrase to describe his first 2 years at Virginia Tech. Whoever wants to go, fire away.
I'll go with uneasy. People were quick to forget that, 2 years ago, we were talking about having some really tough conversations about what Brent Pry could potentially do here and whether or not he was going to last.
How about last September?
And I was about to say,
yeah.
After the Marshall loss, I wrote an article that at the time seemed quite serious and correct, that Virginia Tech had descended to the bottom of the Power Five at that point. Now, Virginia Tech promptly got their heads out of their rears and played tremendous football for the most part down the stretch last year and completely flipped that narrative. But overall, it's been a very uneasy tenure. I mean, there have been times where Brent Pry's program has looked like it's running on all cylinders. There have been times where they look like they don't belong on the field against a top 30 program. And then we've had a little bit of stuff in between. But, I mean, things are definitely trending upwards. But if we're going to take the tenure as a whole, I think uneasy is a easy way to describe it.
I'll go with the phrase, and it's one of my favorites. Rome wasn't built in a day. And I think Brent Pry has the chance to make that abundantly clear, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you guys were, you weren't. I was at the 2021 Pinstripe Bowl. It was tough sledding out there.
Can't say that I was there. No,
I think I erased that from my mind where I was during that game.
And most people have. But to see the team that Virginia Tech was fielding that day gives you an idea of the starting point that Brent Pry had. We're going to talk a lot about a lot of different position groups over the course of this episode, and we really have all off season long. there are dudes who are like the number 9 wide receiver that would have been the number 1 or 2 receiver in year 1. And of course, in that bowl game, I mean, Mike McDaniel could have been wide receiver number 1 in that game.
Hell yeah, baby.
Come on. So from humble beginnings, Virginia Tech was, I mean, truly given something that they hadn't had in 30 some odd years, which was an effective fresh start on the program. And yeah, things weren't good. Obviously started on quite the sour note, losing to Old Dominion. And, that entire 2022 season was a forgettable one, to the point you just made, Mike. Early on last year, a lot of people started vocalizing their displeasure with how things had gone to that point. And the three of us aren't exempt from that. But the credit goes where it's due. And the messages remained the same, which is that we're just going to keep slogging away. We're going to focus on what we're going to focus on. And, eventually we can get this program to where it needs to be. Now, every coach is going to say that, and a lot of coaches don't ever get there. But here we are on, we record August the 19th, 2024. And, there are national college football analysts picking Virginia Tech to go to the playoff. And it's not like a crazy out of left field argument. Certainly could. From what we know today, we have what we know, and there's a lot of it in terms of returning talent on this roster. You've got to project other people to get better, and that's a plausible argument. So to go from where we were under 2 years ago against Old Dominion when that team walked out in the field to where this team stands right now, it's about, you can't say it's as good as we've hoped for. I mean, they do have an overall losing record, but where this team can be has a chance to be above and beyond year 3 expectations. And that's something really exciting. So Rome wasn't built in a day. We'll see if, they can complete the cathedrals or something like that, here in September, October, November.
Yeah, I was going to go with uneven, which is kind of merging the two, right? Uneasy was a great one, and then Rome, Rome wasn't built in a day, obviously ties in well as well. I was going to go with uneven for the obvious reasons. It was really, really bad year 1, really bad through September, and was better towards the end of last year. But look, like this team still hasn't beaten anybody yet, right? I mean, we talked about this when we last recorded about a week and a half ago. Like, Tech hasn't beaten a really good team yet, right? And look, year 1, you're not expecting to beat a good team. Year 2, I think we were hopeful at the outset of the year, but then with how bad September went, we were just really hoping this team would get to 6 wins. We weren't really worried about beating Louisville and Florida State. We were worried about just scratching and clawing and getting to a bowl game. So, I mean, year 3, this kind of ties into the Rome wasn't built in a day thing. This is where you have the opportunity to do it. Now, look, we'll get into the schedule here in a bit. Of course, one of my questions is going to tie into that, but we're going to find out pretty quickly, right? Like, what kind of team this is going to be. The schedule is not impossible. There are some tough games. Obviously, we know Clemson, Miami, but there are a couple other tricky ones in there. I think we're going to know pretty quickly what this team is. Now, pros and cons. The cons are obviously what we saw in year 1, what we saw last September. The pros are that Virginia Tech beat the brakes off of everybody that they basically had equal talent with from late September on last year, right? And the remaining question is whether or not they can do that against better competition. And there are a few opportunities on the schedule where we're going to be able to figure out that answer. And then there are some other games where I think there are some units of certain teams that could give Virginia Tech some trouble, where I think Virginia Tech overall is the better team. But I think if something goes wrong in a couple of games, we're going to kind of find out if this team has what it takes to kind of overcome some of its weaknesses. So I was going to go with uneven, and I think the adjectives and phrases you guys used were good there. Question 2, which I think this is a natural one. Virginia Tech had some holes to fill on the roster, right? Even though last year went really well towards the end of the year, Virginia Tech brought basically everybody back that was important outside of like Derek Canteen was really like the only contributor I can think of on both sides of the ball that really didn't return from last year's team.
Daquan Wright, but
Daquan,
time will tell
right.
whether that's a the
I was gonna
replacement
say I'm
equal to
not
the
really losing sleep
loss.
over that one.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. So Tech brought in a host of transfers, mostly on the defensive side of the ball, as we know. Who will be the most impactful transfer on this team in 2024, and why will that be the case?
I mean, the easy answer is Aeneas Peebles. This is a guy that's got a shot at being an all-conference player. He's filling in a position that I think is always kind of underlooked at the or on the defensive side of the ball. If you can have a really good pass rush up the middle and you can have a stout linebacker play up the middle, that really solves a lot of your issues on defense. I think during some of the Fuente years towards the end, and even first year of Brent Pry's tenure, the play at middle linebacker really caused a lot of issues, and the play at defensive tackle caused a lot of issues. Those guys were not getting enough penetration. They were not creating enough havoc in the backfield. Peebles is the kind of guy that I think will bring a lot of the stuff together and replace most of, if not bring more than, what the guys that are losing on the defensive front bring. So that's kind of a cop out because I think it's kind of obvious that Aeneas is the guy that has the most impact, and I'm sure you guys are going to make cases for other guys that are also going to be, I think, legitimate contributors this year. But Peebles' ability to change the game on the defensive side is going to come in handy, especially as Virginia Tech kind of onboards a new middle linebacker behind him.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ricky's answer is correct, but one overarching question, that we're going to have with Virginia Tech all year, or I mean, essentially all off season long, as we try to project the 2024 season, is, what are the variables? What if it goes well, or what has to happen for things to go really well, and what if it doesn't happen, puts us closer to the floor than expectations or the ceiling. And when I look at Sam Brumfield, I think that's a huge key, right? Pry has, for the most part, really hit in the transfer portal in terms of identifying talent from the lower levels of college football, whether that be group of 5 or below, and being able to insert them in the lineup and make a difference. Sam Brumfield, in what was his lone season under Rick Stockstill at Middle Tennessee, came in and was an extremely serious contributor. You could go back and look at the tape in games against SEC teams. He didn't look like he didn't totally belong there, and he ended up being an All-Conference USA player. Now, there's a difference between Conference USA and the ACC, yes, but that's a full year of Division I FBS college football under his belt and another full off season to increase speed, increase strength, what have you. If he can come in, he doesn't need to be an all ACC linebacker. But if he is a better than league average player who can consistently, find those run fits and have that be a, not an area of risk or reliability, but, even maybe a position of strength for Virginia Tech behind Aeneas Peebles and what I assume is going to be an improved defensive line, then we're talking about a serious top of the conference defense that we saw the potential of against lesser competition last year, possibly being able to transfer or translate no matter who on this current schedule that Virginia Tech is playing is lined up against them on any given Saturday or in some cases Friday or Thursday. That being said, it's an unknown, and maybe it's just not there. I mean, we just don't know. Or maybe he has a tough time adjusting to the defense. But I think that in terms of the potential impact, he's number one on my list because there's the highest level of variability in my mind of how good he could be. And that range has the largest degree of impact. And I think what will be the team's overall performance.
Well, and the backup Mike is Jaden Keller, and I think Keller is a pretty decent player. I think the issue that Keller's had is he's had trouble finding the right fit on the defense. I know he's bounced around a little bit. Uneven play at the Mike. You have to have Brumfield be good because Brumfield was an all-conference player at Middle Tennessee State, and Andrew, I kind of agree. You said better than league average. Just be league average. I mean, Tech didn't even have a league average Mike last year, right? So just be league average.
Just don't be a liability.
Just don't be a liability, right? And I feel a lot better about Jaden Keller in a depth role at Mike than I do having him out there for like 90+% of the defensive snaps. So if he's got to play some, that's fine. I just don't know if I want to. And we'll have a conversation later. The group will get to. I'm not sure I want to run him out there, for most of the snaps again. If he has to play, I think he's capable of playing and playing well. But I think having Brumfield be really good would be helpful. I'm going to go with a different guy on the defensive line. I'm going to go with Kamari Copeland, and it's kind of for some of the reasons we just mentioned. And Ricky, you've been beating this drum, and I think you were correct. Virginia Tech, like a lot of fans felt really good about what Virginia Tech had on the interior defensive line with Mario Kendricks and Norrell Pollard and Josh Fuga over the last few years. But really, like, their play was kind of like this, like very up and down. Josh Fuga
was the only one that really was play like elite football at that position.
Right, agree. And he's gone too, right? So Feldarius Payne's gone, and then you had Kendricks and Pollard, and Fuga is still here, and he will be playing, which is, it's, again, good to have playable depth there, a guy that's played a lot of snaps. But I think the importance of Kamari Copeland coming from the JUCO level is really important because, we talked about the impact that Aeneas Peebles can have, and we know the kind of impact he can have. He was an all-conference player at Duke last year. We know he can play Power 5 football at a very high level. I guess we're calling it Power 4 now, but you guys know what I mean. Very good player. But I think Virginia Tech is searching for that playable depth, right? And obviously Fuga's going to get snaps. But if you can have another guy emerge on the interior, like Kamari Copeland, a guy who's got multiple years of eligibility left, that would be extremely helpful, right? Because Peebles is going to be one and done. Fuga, after this year, is done. So having Kamari Copeland come in and play well and be like a capable player would really set up Tech well, at least with a jumping off point for 2025 on the interior defensive line. Because I think it's safe to say the pass rush is going to take a step back in 2 seasons. So I think just kind of having Copeland not only contribute now, but then kind of establish a premier role for 25 would be really helpful. So I'm going to go with him, but I think the 2 obvious answers are Peebles and then Brumfield. I think those are the 2. We're going to take a step back now. Which unit on the defense, and we're kind of talking about the defense, so we're just going to start with them. Which unit on the defense concerns you the least? Okay. And then which unit concerns you the most? And I think we may have similar answers on the most part, so we're going to start with the least.
Andrew, go ahead. I've been leading us off.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it simple. 2 of the 5 best players on the team are cornerbacks, so long as they can stay healthy. I think that's a pretty good group. and even still, I mean, obviously, like you talk about playable depth, but even a guy like Braylon Johnson, if you had to step in for any given amount of time, like maybe I'm just buying into coach hype, but I think the players behind Delane and behind Strong are solid enough to step in for a period of time. Now, if lost them both for the season, as you could say with any position group, we're going to be having a different conversation. But I think it's your strength and there's depth. So easy corner.
As far as best goes, I'm going to say the defensive line. This is a unit that's got maybe an all-conference edge player in Antoine Power Island. Peebles, I think, is going to make a huge difference. Mike mentioned Kamari Copeland. I think is a really good find. I think he's going to be somebody who certainly is going to be logging significant snaps. Um, I don't know yet who's going to really provide enough rush off the other side, opposite APR. But as far as the defensive line goes, I think that's a pretty stout unit. I don't know what you guys think of the least confidence unit, but I think it's got to be linebacker. We still have not seen competent play out of this group. They're still trying to figure out who's going to play star. Kelly Lawson's kind of been bouncing back and forth. If Brumfield is starting at Mike, who's going to play backer? Is it Jaden Keller? Is it somebody else? There's not a reputable contributor that was on this defense last year in that unit. There's not a reputable contributor at linebacker that's played Power 4, Power 5 football. So I do believe in Brumfield and being kind of a stabilizing force at linebacker, but I don't know about the guys around him. And I think that's got to be the biggest question mark on this defense. And quite honestly, it might be the biggest question mark on the entire team.
I'm concerned. Let me start with least. It's corner, followed up closely by the defensive line. I just think our top two corners are so strong. Now, if there's an injury, I'm, and this is maybe where I talk myself into the defensive line being the strongest unit. I think Virginia Tech's defensive line is like more able to sustain injuries because of the depth they've built, particularly on the interior defensive line. Having Fuga still on the roster, adding a Kelvin Gilliam, who was obviously a very highly touted prospect and played very limited snaps at Oklahoma, but obviously is the type of player that a lot of teams would really like to have as like their third or fourth interior defensive lineman, right?
A guy who's another guy that could find his way into a 2 deep.
Yeah, and Perry as well, that we didn't even talk about earlier. Defensive ends, I think, it kind of remains to be seen who will line up, on the other side of APR. Is it Keyshawn Burgos? Is it Cole Nelson? But I think there's enough there that you rotate the guys, you get enough production. We saw enough, I think, last year to feel okay about that group on the other side. My concern is I think the linebacker concern is valid just because Kelly Lawson's been bouncing around. Keontae Jenkins has been banged up, but when he's been playing, he's been bouncing around. Both those guys have played a lot of snaps, but will they settle into a role for like 12 games? I think that concern's valid. I'm still concerned about safety. Like, Jalen Jones is a senior. Last year, it was basically like a freshman year for him because it was a brand new position. He played a lot of snaps, which I think will benefit him. Mose Phillips, speaking of playing a lot of snaps that will benefit him, Mose Phillips, I think, will be relied upon. Whether he's starting or not kind of remains to be seen, but I think he's going to play. And then the concern with Jalen Stroman, it doesn't have anything to do with his talent, right? It's just stop targeting, stop getting hurt, stay on the field. Like that's the concern with Stroman. Just be available. Yeah, just be available. I mean, when he's out there, obviously we know he can be relied upon. He's a really good player. So the concern doesn't have anything to do with his ability. It's more of his availability. So I think the biggest concern for me is safety, just because I think we got to be like, we're putting a lot of eggs in the basket of Jalen Jones and Mose Phillips just kind of coming along. And
yeah,
I think they can, and I think experience does help. Especially for Jones, who's played like a lot of college football and has gone through a lot of camps, right? And is just like been in the room a while. I think having the understanding of the defense and what they want to do on that side of the ball, like being in the meeting room with Pry and Marv and just like having that understanding for a year, I think will help. But I still have concerns there for sure. So we'll see.
One note on Jalen Jones, if the college football video game is any indicator, he will lead the league or lead the nation in interceptions this year.
Yeah, we like that. Yeah, we like that as an indicator. That
That's
would be
what he did for
fantastic.
me in my first year.
We like that a lot. We like that a lot. Flipping it to the offense, which unit on the offense concerns you guys the least? I'll lead us off here because I haven't answered first yet. It's the receiving core. I mean, Jesus, there's a million of them, and they can all play, and they have all played a lot of snaps together. Allie Jennings is back. Felton's back. Jalen Lane's back. Gosnell, I know he got hurt in the bowl game, but he'll play at some point. There's just a lot of just proven receivers. I didn't even mention Aiden Green. He played a lot of snaps last year. There's just a lot. I mean, they go like 5 deep, and there are some other guys that the coaching staff's really excited about that haven't even played yet. I mean, they go probably 6, 7, 8 deep if they want to.
I'm thinking when that unit is healthy, they're probably confident with 7 or 8 guys playing
Chance,
like regular snap. I'm a big Chance Fitzgerald fan. I think
yeah.
I think he's got the physique and the ability to catch downfield and catch as well with his hands. He's not one of those guys that needs his body, but yeah, the receiving core, Andrew, I don't know about you. I think that we're all in agreement that that's probably the safest unit on offense and one of the safest units on the team.
Yeah, I mean, the receiving core, your top 3 guys, I know for sure would have been your number 1 in 2022, probably your number 1 in 2021. Yeah. And like, again, I haven't seen him yet, but of that bank of young talent that you have down there on the roster, like, who's to say that those guys wouldn't have been major contributors in past seasons where Virginia Tech wasn't as deep as well. Like,
right.
The pure issue of being behind established, talented players, which is an issue if you care about playing time right now today. Thankfully, whatever Fontel Mines is preaching clearly resonates, and these are guys who are willing to wait their turn. So that's the position group that not only concerns me the least today, but concerns me the least as I project out 3-4 years for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I was going to say,
And when you have to, given that Kyron Drones, one way or another, isn't going to be here forever, if you do have to go to the transfer portal for a quarterback, having that as your team strong suit is going to be a pretty solid selling point. So,
I mean, do you guys remember when we were getting excited? Well, some of us were getting excited about Changa Hodge and Jaden Blue.
God.
Like, this unit has come a long way from what they were 2-3 years ago. And Mines obviously deserves a ton of credit for it. Pry, Bowen, they all deserve credit for kind of restocking and retooling that entire room. But it's certainly the safest. As far as the unit that you're probably concerned the most about, it's probably the offensive line. I do think the offensive line is going to be okay, but there's still a lot of question marks. Parker Clements at right tackle still does not sit well with me. I really wish Virginia Tech had a better option there. They need to clean up some of the interior play. Montavious Cunningham might be able to help with that. But this is a unit that has a little bit of talent. Someone like Xavier Chaplin, I think, is going to be a relatively good tackle in this league in the ACC. But the offensive line, and also, too, just when it comes to protecting the most important part of your offense, which is the quarterback, Virginia Tech needs Kyron Drones healthy. Kyron Drones not healthy changes the entire outlook of the season. You can be happy about Collinshley all you want. You can be excited about Pop Watson all you want. You take Drones off the field, this entire calculus changes.
Yeah.
So this offensive line has got to do a really, really good job of protecting Kyron Drones. A lot of that falls on Drones himself when it comes to making calls and things like that. But this group's got to be really strong, and they've got to provide a run game that isn't Kyron Drones to allow him to kind of get a breather and have a more balanced offense.
We've come a long way with Kyron Drones, Ricky, because
Yes.
I remember we had a few games last year where he started to look better and we were getting a little more optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
And Ricky, you in particular, like, I need to see more. I need to see more. And then he did it for like 3 more games, which that was a totally fair opinion you had.
Yeah.
Did it for like 3 more games. And then we came on a podcast. I can't remember. It was like late October, early November. We came on the podcast and Ricky planted his flag. He goes, I have seen enough. I've seen enough. He's the quarterback. He's the guy next year. And then obviously played fantastic the rest of the year. And there was no question about that. But the point you just made is really important, because the unit that concerns me the most, obviously, is the offensive line. But I am really concerned, obviously, about the trajectory of the team behind Kyron Drones, if it's Schlee or if it's Pop Watson. Now, I know a lot of teams in college football are concerned about losing their starting quarterback. Of course, the trajectory is going to change, but there are a lot of teams who do have proven commodities behind their starter, right? Whether it's a guy who is played in elsewhere, right? Which
Virginia Tech doesn't have an Arch Manning, right?
They don't have somebody else.
This is not the situation where Virginia Tech has the future waiting in the wings and you're just waiting for Kyron to age out.
Right.
This is a situation where Drones is head and shoulders above everyone in the room. And you can still believe in the future of a Pop Watson or even a Dottie Belfort, but we're not there yet, right? Like there's a reason why Colin Schlee is on this roster.
Right.
Virginia Tech really needs to do their best to protect Kyron Drones. That goes to the offensive line. That goes to the coaching staff, to making sure that they're monitoring his usage in the run game and trying to make sure that you're getting the most out of him, because he is such an effective runner, but also you want to try and protect him.
And Andrew, I'll cede the floor to you, but just one more quick point I wanted to make is, like, Kyron Drones being as good as he was towards the end of last year is a big reason why the quarterback situation is what it is behind him. So I just want to point that out, because a lot of programs, they have guys who transfer in because they want to compete for a starting quarterback job. The reason why it's Colin Schlee and not somebody else, right? As far as like a veteran, a guy who's been around, the reason why it's Schlee and it's not anybody better than that is because those guys don't want to come and transfer in if they're not going to have a shot at the starting quarterback job. So that's part of the reason why Tech's in this position at quarterback, is because Drones was so good last year. So that's also a very good problem to have. Andrew?
Well, first of all, I mean, you guys are acting like Colin Schlee's like never played before. I mean, he did start like a year at the MAC.
Yeah, but he's not he's not someone that you're like hitching your wagon to. Like, yes, I'm ready to go. I'm on the Schlee bandwagon. Like, you can be comfortable, I guess, with him being a backup. But if Drones goes down, no one on this podcast is going to think, oh, Virginia Tech's still going to win 8-9 games.
I'll tell you what, Andrew, I've never gotten myself too jazzed up about a Kent State quarterback. You know,
I'm just saying, like, if it's like for a quarter, I don't think it'll be that bad.
Hey, if that's all he's got to play this year, totally cool with it. I'll sign up for it.
I hope he plays much more than that. I hope there's a lot of fourth quarters where the game is out of reach and you're protecting.
He's an upgrade.
In that case, we need to bring in Pop for those situations.
He's an upgrade over FCS backups that we've had in the past.
Yeah, I mean, like, but in reality, like, it's who we got. So.
Or he's even an upgrade over a wide receiver we had at quarterback at one point, but that's a different.
Which one, Blumrick or Burmeister?
Blumrick. At least Burmeister like played legitimate quarterback elsewhere. He didn't do very well, but like Blumrick couldn't even make it as quarterback.
Which one is not the greatest answer?
No, it's not.
It's not good.
Burmeister was a gamer. His career was ruined by injuries that he, at the end of the day, played through.
That's what I was told.
I'm not here to disparage Braxton Burmeister's name.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough to be him because of who he was effectively picked over.
He's no Michael Brewer, I'll tell you that.
He's no Hendon Hooker, and that's kind of
we know that
the whole story there. But hindsight. You'd say hindsight 2020, but hindsight was 2020 at the time as well. So like foresight.
Yeah, it wasn't hindsight. We all knew that Hooker should have been the guy.
Either way, yes, if Kyron Drones can't see the field for an extended period of time, it does ruin the trajectory of the season. It kind of just is what it is. It's going to be really tough, like you said, Mike, to bring anyone who would be capable of not ruining your outlook on the season if they came in to come because they don't think they're going to play. right. So that kind of is what it is. I would be curious, and this is a down the road question, it's whether it's going to be Watson or whether it's going to be Delford or whether, be it next year or 2 years from now, it's someone who we've never heard of before, but is going to be starting for us soon. So, I mean, that kind of is what it is. Offensive line.
Tosh Bullock. Just kidding.
Bring him back. Is he at Kent State? Oh, no, he's at Akron.
He's bounced around.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? But, yeah, offensive line is, the big wild card in all of this. Tech's got a good running back. They've got plenty of good wide receivers. They've got a great quarterback. We've seen in the past, there's plenty of examples throughout the history of college football where you can have as much talent as you want, on the outside, and you can have a decent quarterback, and it doesn't matter. I mean, look at Boston College 2022, a team that disaster of Virginia Tech team beat. They had Zay Flowers, first-round pick.
Yep.
And that's when Djokovic was still somewhat like slinging it before, I guess he couldn't feel his hand or something like that because of all the hits he ended up taking that season. But yeah, that team couldn't do anything. And now, I mean, granted, this offensive line.
His hands were cold. That's all it was. His hands were just cold. Throw that in there.
But yeah.
Shout out Fu.
Shout out Fu. But either way, right. I mean, we've seen what the floor looks like for this line. It's a lot of the same guys. And there's a lot more playable depth behind the returning guys that we have from last year, as well as, whether it be a transfer like Montavious Cunningham or whether it be, assumed improvement from Brody Meadows or Laith Ganem, who at one point was the number one recruit in the Virginia Tech class. Like, you'd think that those guys would be getting to the point where they can make real contributions, especially at a position like the offensive line where size really does matter, and it's going to take 2-3 years of intensive, controlled physical training to get you to that point. Those guys should be knocking on the door.
Right.
Could Xavier Chaplin take a big step forward? I mean, he was a name that not a lot of people were thinking about when he came in as a recruit. He came in and played formidably last year. Can he make that big jump? What's the permutation of linemen going to look like? And Tech, a team who didn't have really much playable depth behind that offensive line last year, got lucky and saw a healthy season from your main guys.
Right.
But is there flexibility there if someone does go down? And can you bring in a guy or two for any given amount of time and not take a gigantic step backwards that causes you to limit the playbook and have to worry about things because you're as strong as your weakest link? Like, what can we do to protect this guy? All that stuff, especially when you get down the stretch, in that middle of the season where it feels like Tech's playing the majority of what should be their most competitive football games. How's the line going to hold up through then? If this is a group that can be, like I said, just top half of the ACC, this could be a really, really special season. But if this group ends up being a big liability, then, maybe we all got a little bit ahead of ourselves, throughout that offseason leading up to it. So that's the biggest thing you got to worry about.
Well, that leads well into this next question. And I want to assume that Virginia Tech is going to be mostly at full health at the key positions, okay? Because my question is, what is Virginia Tech's floor in 2024? And I think, obviously, to answer that question, we could all say, oh, yeah, Kyron Drones gets hurt or Delane or Strong get hurt. Yeah, obviously, that's going to really bottom things out. But I think, reasonably speaking, if everybody's healthy, don't give your record prediction yet. I mean, you can throw a record in here, as an answer here. Don't give me your prediction yet. But what do you guys think the floor is for this roster if we're expecting relatively full health at the key positions? And let's lay out that kind of doomsday scenario with the team at full health and just not performing well, what units do you think would have most to do with it? And I'm sure we're all going to have shared sentiment over these, but curious what you guys think, just looking at the schedule and playing that out a little bit.
If this team is going to, I guess, hit the floor, it's probably going to come on both sides of the ball. I don't think there's a scenario in which this team bottoms out because one unit in particular really struggles. The floor, Kyron Drones really struggles. Kyron is a good passer. He's not a great passer. He's got a lot of room to grow on that front. If he doesn't take that next step and become the kind of passer that people think he can be, it is going to limit this offense. We also have to remember that the offense that they had so much success with last year came in the middle of the season, and I think it took coordinators a while to adjust to that. They're going to have an entire offseason now to attack Kyron Drones in different ways. So if Kyron struggles a little bit, doesn't really progress, I think that's where you get to the floor for this program for this season in particular. On the flip side, it goes back to the linebackers. If the linebacker play just is not there and they struggle in play action, they struggle to defend the run, this defense is going to give up a lot of points. Having those corners on the outside only helps but so much. They can't slow down the run game. That's not their job. So the linebackers have really got to bring it, at least bring some average play. That's how you keep this team from being on the floor. So to me, those are the two biggest things if we're trying to avoid what could be a doomsday worst-case scenario.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on any of those things, Ricky. It's Drones, maybe teams figured him out and he didn't take a big step forward.
Mm-hmm.
Line is terrible. And I mean, you have to assume the line gets worse, right? I mean, they did win games with the same people last year.
Right.
So you have to assume that they stay the same or get worse. And like transfer flops, like Gilliam is a nothing. Brumfield is worse than what Virginia Tech's had at the position in years past. And
Peebles forgets how to play football.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about that one. I think
don't even mention that, Michael.
I mean, that's outside of the realistic set of possibilities.
I agree.
But free safety ends up being a liability disaster. We're assuming full health, but whatever the maximum amount of injuries that you're assuming at full health occurs.
Right.
And I say what? Like, I still think the team's pretty good. 6-7 wins.
I was going to say, yeah.
I still healthy Drones all year, 6-7 wins.
I was going to say, I have a really hard time just with the schedule and the construction of the team where even if, and mine's very similar, like the Tech's just really bad in the trenches, like offensive line doesn't really get much better, defensive line, I think Peebles obviously be good, but maybe like the depth isn't good or Brumfield flops at Mike, with a step up in competition and maybe Tech still searching there. The safeties don't make as big of a jump as we would hope, in year two for like Mose Phillips and Jalen Jones. I think with all that said and the schedule, like I have a really hard time seeing this team win less than like 7 in the regular season. Just there's a lot of bad teams on there with a lot more questions at Virginia Tech.
To get to that point, you have to start making like outside of just overall performance assumptions, like assumptions about the other teams hitting their best possible case scenario. Like Malik Murphy is revolutionary at Duke and Manny Diaz was never the problem anywhere. It wasn't Ohio State being held back by Kyle McCord. It was Kyle McCord being held back by Ohio State. And Syracuse is suddenly a contender.
Actually, Syracuse's wide receivers are better than Ohio State's in a weird turn of events.
Marvin Harrison, who? Like, here's dude on Syracuse who was a 2-star recruit out of Buffalo. Air travel more taxing than we thought. And going from Miami to Stanford over the course of 8 days just turns out to be detrimental. And these guys, and I guess probably more importantly than anything, like these guys are drinking their own Kool-Aid and coming to either Vandy, Marshall, or ODU and take an L. Because that's to do worse than 6-7 wins, you got to lose at least one of those games. And those are games that I'm sure that we and 99.9% of Virginia Tech fans have marked down as 3 wins.
Yeah,
right.
Agreed.
So, yeah, I mean, again, below 6-7 wins, even to get to 6-7 wins, especially 6, it's kind of hard to imagine, given what we know right now. But that's why they play the games.
Virginia Tech's known for losing one they shouldn't, so just keep that in mind when I make my prediction in a few minutes. Virginia Tech's ceiling in 2024, I mean, we can probably keep this pretty quick. I mean, maybe talking about the record is the most interesting part of the ceiling part of the conversation. I still think, like, everybody's going to be, oh, yeah, 12-0 is the ceiling. It's like, yeah, okay. But, like, going undefeated in college football is really, really hard. Like, I still think the ceiling for this team, even with an easier schedule, and we're assuming the lines improve, we're assuming linebacker and safeties figure it out, everything's going great. You know, Drones takes another step, and, you know, teams who are schematically prepared for him, you know, he kind of keeps a leg up on all of them. I still think 10 or 11 wins is probably the ceiling, like in the regular season, just because going undefeated is really hard. Clemson and Miami still have, like, just from a talent standpoint, have more talent and depth. So it's just, like, hard to imagine Virginia Tech just, like, running through both of them. And then just Tech never wins all the games they're supposed to. So there's a slip up in there somewhere, even in the best case scenario, I feel like, which would put Tech, by the way, in an ACC title game, which fantastic.
Yeah.
I think it would put them in the ACC title game. I don't know. The ACC looks wide open, but I think, you know, assume like a 11, let's say like best case, like it's like 11-1 with a 7-1 record in league play. I think that gets you in the conference title game.
Might depend on who you lose to, but
I agree. No, I agree with that.
Yeah, I'm going to go 11-1 as the ceiling. If this team is as good as we all hope and want it to be, I think they still lose probably one of the Clemson or Miami games. I don't think they would drop any of the other ones. But I think beating both of those teams is a hard ask. So if we're living in Candyland, right, and this is the dream team as far as we're concerned, I think 11-1 on this schedule is the ceiling.
Yep.
Well, I'll just live in Candyland and say 12-0. Like,
hell yeah, there it is.
The team to do it, like, it exists. Like,
not pictured in Andrew's screen is the Kool-Aid that he's drinking.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but for the
to
first
be fair,
time,
I asked you guys to drink the Kool-Aid in this question. To be fair,
for the first time in my fanhood of Virginia Tech, really, especially since we started doing this podcast, you could see how it could happen. Everything has to go right, but in years past, we were putting together 15 different things that had to go right to, will ourselves to 8 wins. Most of the knowns are there. You have a team that went 5-3 in league play last year.
Yeah.
And yeah, they were outmatched by the better competition, and that's what you got to worry about, right? And of course, like the perpetual Virginia Tech slip-ups, which, it's hard. Again, that's why I'm not saying this team's going to go 12-0.
We know. It's funny that you went 12-0.
If you're putting a line on every game right now, Virginia Tech's the favorite in all but 2, and they're not massive, more than 2 touchdown underdogs in the games that they're supposed to lose, right? And
I agree. Yeah.
And we don't know what, and again, this is everything going right for Virginia Tech, and part of everything going right for Virginia Tech is something's going wrong for the other teams. Maybe Miami's Miami. Still, maybe not accessing the transfer portal doesn't help a Clemson team that already struggled last year, that finished with a worse record in league play than Virginia Tech. who has to come to Virginia Tech, in which, again, as this scenario is playing itself out, Virginia Tech's playing Clemson at 9-0. And it's going to be the most hyped game in Blacksburg in 20 years.
nuts.
Yeah.
So
The most hype game in 2 decades. Yeah.
yeah, like
Oh no, there was a lot of hype behind that. Was it 2017? Clemson was 1, I think, and I think we were 12. We had
Yeah,
one loss
that
at
was
the
a big
time,
one.
I believe. There
The
was a
Kelly
lot of
Bryant.
hype on that one. Yeah.
Kelly Bryant year. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, again, my official prediction does not say that Virginia Tech's going to win these games, because those teams do seem to be more talented. But just as I'm open to the possibility that Virginia Tech could drop a home game against Georgia Tech and Rutgers, so too am I open to the idea that they could beat the teams that on paper look better than them right now. So, when you have national college football pundits like Brent McMurphy, who today released his college football playoff prediction and had Virginia Tech in there,
Yeah.
it just shows that based on the intangibles that lead people to believe that football team's going to be good before the year starts, some people believe that Virginia Tech has them, because they do. So it's not just the Kool-Aid, it's a possibility.
Agree. No, I agree. I mean, it's another schedule question, because now we're kind of tightening this podcast up here. We're getting very close to our record prediction now, but name Virginia Tech's either their toughest game, or the game that you think Virginia Tech is most likely to slip up in outside of Clemson and Miami, the 2 toughest games on the schedule. I'll give you mine if you want.
Is it Syracuse?
No, mine's actually Rutgers.
Okay.
Here's why. I think Gavin Wimsatt is no longer the quarterback for Rutgers. I do think that is significant. They do still return a lot up front on both sides of the ball on a team that gave Virginia Tech's both offensive and defensive lines a lot of trouble last year. That's a concern for me, and I think it's going to be a very, very telling game for the Miami game the following week. And then, obviously, Clemson later in the year. Now, clear downgrade at quarterback for Rutgers in Kalikmanis, or maybe I butchered that name, from Minnesota, who came in as a transfer. Clear downgrade. But that is a game I have circled, just because I think that's one where we're going to learn a lot about the offensive and defensive lines, and a game where, I mentioned this in passing earlier, I think Virginia Tech can still win, but I think, maybe we look at it and come out of it being like, okay, really glad we survived that one, but man, I'm not feeling great about Miami next week, or not feeling really good about, name that opponent later in the schedule. Maybe I'm not feeling good about an improved Georgia Tech front, or, really not feeling good about facing Clemson's front. So that's one of those games where I think Virginia Tech obviously has enough talent to win, but, they could potentially be exposed in areas of the team that we have questions about. So I'm going to say Rutgers.
Andrew mentioned, I think on the last podcast that we did, that Virginia Tech hasn't won at Syracuse since the Donovan McNabb era, which is just absurd. So I think that's it for me. I'm not so sold on that Kyle McCord was a problem at Ohio State. I mean, I think he was fine. I think he's going to do fine at Syracuse. It's a tough place to play. They're going to be energized under first-year head coach Fran Brown. To me, I think that's the game that outside of the top 2 that scares me the most. It's kind of like a house of horrors almost going up there. So it's right before the Clemson game. It's going to be a look-ahead game. You're going up against an offense that you're not really sure what you're going to run into.
Right.
To me, I think that's the one that sticks out the most.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny, right? Because when we look at the schedule, like, it is easy to see a bunch of wins in there, and we talk about like 7 wins being kind of a floor, 6-7 wins. Well, 3 of your guaranteed wins come at the beginning of the season. Vandy Marshall and ODU. two of them really come at the end.
Yeah.
With Duke and Virginia. But from Rutgers through Clemson, you can see where the trickery comes into play, right? I mean, Rutgers is going to be a very big physical football game, like we saw last year in New Jersey, where Virginia Tech's weaknesses, both up front and against the run, were exposed. Coming off that physical game on a short week, you got to go to Miami, and then you got to take a big flight across the country and go play at Stanford. Now, not that Stanford's projected to be very good, and I will not lie to you, I don't know that much about Stanford. I have never in my life had to care about Stanford football until right about now. But it's a long trip, especially coming from having to do the trip to Miami prior. Long break, BC should be a win. There are people who would say that Haynes King is a better quarterback than Kyron Rhodes. And it's not like just like three people. It's quite a few people, right? Georgia Tech's not a game to sleep on. And then you have the Syracuse game for all the reasons that Mike said, plus the Kyle McCord factor right before that Clemson game if things are going well. So that heart of the season is where you have your issue games. I'm going to say Georgia Tech because I'm very high on Haynes King. And I think that, if they can get through Rutgers, if they can get to the Georgia Tech game with just a loss to Miami, you can picture them feeling themselves, maybe looking a little bit ahead to Clemson. Suddenly those higher aspirations are looking more and more like reality. And specifically those Georgia Tech and Syracuse games offer a big possibility for slip up. Though I do agree with you, Mike, Rutgers, it's hard to overlook a team that you couldn't beat a year ago with roughly the same roster, right?
Right.
And I guess you could say the same thing about Marshall. But but Rutgers is going to be the game where we get our first glimpse of, is this team, or hopefully we get our first glimpse, because if we saw it prior to that, it would mean that we saw it when we didn't want to see it, right? They were upset. But against Rutgers, it will be our first chance to see, okay, is this team really capable of what we thought they were capable of? Because, if you're losing to Rutgers, you're not going to the college football playoff.
Right. Agree. All right, guys. It's time. We have to go on the record. It's time. Ricky, listen, if you predict 9 or 10 wins, I do think you have a better chance of that hitting this year than it did a couple years ago when you predicted it. So,
I was contemplating whether I should bring it up.
Yeah.
do have that going for you. So
for any new listeners, was it 22? Was that was the year, right? We had Big John on the podcast for our preview that year, and my overexcited ass picked, was it 9-3 or 10-2?
I can't remember. It was in that range.
It was 9-3.
Regardless, it was ridiculous is what it was. And obviously Virginia Tech fell flat on their face that year. So last year, I think I was correct at 6-6, or I might have picked 5-7, but I was a lot closer last year. So we'll have to see how this season goes.
Fair. Andrew, you want to go next?
I mean, overall, it's exciting, right? Because I think I've picked 6-6 every single year that we've done this podcast and been right more often than not.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
It's exciting to be in a position where I can't even decide if that record, which we've gotten so excited to get to 6-6 so many times, to call that the floor for this team is, a sign of progress in and of itself. But I'm going to go with 9-3. Picking game by game, is kind of difficult, obviously. I'm going to say they lose to Clemson. I'm going to say they lose to Miami. I'm more confident than any of the games that they're going to lose to Miami. I'm buying the Miami hype, mostly because I've seen Cam Ward play a good amount of football, and I think he's a game changer in a way that 99% of players in the ACC just aren't.
Yeah. They haven't had a quarterback like that in a really long time.
Yeah, like if ever. So we'll put the L at Miami. Short week on the road. We'll say Clemson's a loss because I'm not going to pick us to beat Clemson until we do. Certainly not after a season where against Florida State and Louisville and for 3 quarters against NC State when the game mattered, this team looked pretty outclassed by tougher competition. So put the Clemson loss on there. And then one other loss in there. I'll call it Rutgers. I'll say that this team needs gets a wake-up call at home against a team with good play up front and that can run the ball. So that could easily be Georgia Tech. That could easily be Syracuse. I do think this Virginia Tech team is really good. I think it's going to be the best season we've had in a long time. With the bowl game, potentially 10 wins, I wouldn't pick the playoff. But, yeah, that's kind of where I stand. What about you guys?
I'm going 9-3. I think Virginia Tech loses both Miami and Clemson. And I just think they drop a second game in that 3-game stretch of Georgia Tech, Syracuse, Clemson. Like, I think there's a second loss in there in that 3-game stretch outside of the Clemson game. I worry about Virginia Tech's offensive line in the Miami game. I really worry about their offensive line in the Clemson game. And then I think there's just like one game where Virginia Tech is going to go in as a favorite that they could lose, whether that's going to the Dome at Cuse or losing to a good quarterback in Haynes King at Georgia Tech. I just think that's what happens. I'm not terribly worried about Duke. I think Manny Diaz is a good hire there. I think he's going to do well. I think Malik Murphy is going to have a chance to be pretty good. They're so bad around him, and I think the defense is going to be really, really bad. UVA is going to be horrid. They're going to be awful. That game could go worse than last year for UVA potentially. I don't worry about Stanford, even with the cross-country trip. I just think Virginia Tech's a much better team. And I mentioned the Rutgers game is kind of a trap game, but I also think that's a game Virginia Tech's going to have circled, and I just think Rutgers' quarterback play in that game is just going to be potentially heinous. So it's just, and it's at home, right? Vandy, Marshall, Old Dominion. I mean, for the love of God, if you don't beat those 3 teams, I know Tech didn't beat Marshall last year. I know we're just 2 years removed from a loss at Old Dominion to start the tenure, but I mean, Jesus God. You got to win those games. Just Marshall's not the same team. Old Dominion's going to be bad. Vanderbilt, woof. 9-3 is my prediction. 8-4 wouldn't shock me, but 9-3 is my prediction. I think 8-4 is probably more likely than 10-2. I would say. So that's kind of the direction I'm leaning. If anybody's interested in that, I think 8-4 is probably more likely than 10-2.
It's more likely 12-0 or 6-6.
12-0. I think. Well, are we talking injuries? I don't know.
No,
that's a tough one.
In our imaginary, you can't blame 6-6 entirely on injuries.
Yeah, I think probably 12-0 is more likely than 6-6. I do. Just this team was just dreadful in September last year, and they still got to 6 wins in the regular season. You know what I mean? It's just I have a hard time thinking. Yeah, it would have to be really bad, I think. So, yeah, going 9-3.
All right. And so we're all in agreement Virginia Tech's going to go 3-0 to start the year.
Yeah.
Let's pray that happens. So let's ignore the first quarter of the schedule. I think Virginia Tech beats Rutgers. Mike brings up a good point. Tech losing to them last year, I think, is going to leave a bad taste in some of the guys' mouths. They're going to be ready to go for that game. I'm not overly concerned about it. I do think that game will be competitive. I do think Virginia Tech will probably have to put it away in the fourth quarter. Right. Rutgers is not going to go down easy, but I do think Virginia Tech wins that game. Have I ever bought into the Miami hype?
No.
As long as you guys have known me?
No. Not a single time.
Virginia Tech's winning that game.
5-0.
Miami, I can't buy into it yet. Give me the Hokies to go 5-0. Virginia Tech's beaten Stanford.
6-0.
This is not a this is not a very good Stanford team. That is going to be a tough game. It wouldn't shock me if Virginia Tech I wouldn't actually shock me if they're trailing after the first quarter. But I do think that they're the better team, but it's going to take some adjusting for them. We know what Michael thinks of Boston College.
Bad. Worse this year. Worse.
Virginia Tech's winning that game.
7-0.
I think they're going to beat Georgia Tech.
8-0. Running out of games, Rick.
Haynes King scares me, but Virginia Tech, I think, matches up well against a team that's going to rely on Haynes King. If Delane, Strong, APR, those guys are healthy, I think they're going to make it tough on Haynes King. As good as he is, and David Hale put out a thread today about ACC quarterbacks, and he's buying into the Haynes King hype too. So I think it's warranted, but I think Virginia Tech wins that one. It's going to come crashing down against Syracuse. Fran Brown, I think, is building something there, that they're going to be a really plucky team. Again, I'm not sold that Kyle McCord was all that bad. I'm not really sure why Ohio State just jettisoned him as quickly as they did. I think Syracuse wins that game. Virginia Tech's going to drop that one. Virginia Tech's going to then lose to Clemson. Clemson is still not Clemson of 5 years ago, 6 years ago, but the level of recruiting that Dabo has done over the last 3 years, I think, gives them too much depth. I think they're just better athletes. Cade Klubnik, I think, is going to be a little better this year. Go ahead and give me Clemson to win that game, and what will be a really disappointing game for all of us, because I think we're all going to be really hoping Virginia Tech finally gets over the hump and wins a big game at home, and that would certainly be that one. This Duke game, I think, is also a little scary in the sense of I think Manny Diaz is a decent coach. But, Mike, you bring up a very good point. Outside of Malik Murphy, they stink.
Yeah.
And I do think Diaz is going to make them a little better, but I think Virginia Tech's winning that one. The Mickey Mouse Clubhouse folks.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. Virginia Tech's going to win that one too. So I'm at 10-2.
Hey.
And for those that I don't know if Andrew was on yet before I told Mike this, but I just made that up off the top of my head. I did not come in prepared to pick 10-2. So how I'm feeling right now, I went through the schedule after talking with you guys. That's where I'm at. I think Virginia Tech goes 10-2.
Does that get them into the ACC title game at 6-2 in league play? Is that enough?
Probably not.
Probably not.
I don't know what NC State's going to do this year.
Yeah.
Clemson. If you lose to Clemson, I think you're done.
Yeah. I think that scenario, it's either
but the
Clemson,
flip side
NC
of that
State,
is if
Florida
you
State.
lose to Clemson but beat Miami, then you would own the tiebreaker over them, which would help. And I'm not sold on Florida State as an elite team. I think they're very good.
Yeah,
I just don't know that are they 11-1 worthy? I don't know.
Right. Do they win 7 conference games? Or
yeah, I mean they very well might. DJ Uyunglele has made a huge growth in his career, and I think he certainly will help that offense maintain a lot of what they've been doing. But Keon Coleman not being there makes a huge difference. I think they're going to be a very interesting team to watch. I think they may be a little overrated as far as the preseason rankings go, but I think they probably fall just short, and it probably would be a tiebreaker in that situation.
To just answer your NC State preseason number 24, NC State.
Yeah.
They play Clemson on the road. That'll be a game in September on the 21st. So
early. Yeah.
They'll be taken care of early. But to our Clemson point, right? Like, because of the in-house depth that Clemson has, I think November is the last time you want to play them, because they can overcome the inevitable injuries that all teams will face by that point.
Right.
Better than anyone else in the league.
Yeah.
So NC State presumably getting them at full health, though it's on the road, gives them the closest to an advantage that they'll have in that scenario, right?
Yep.
Beyond that, they got Wake and Syracuse, Cal and Stanford, Duke, Georgia Tech, and UNC. So I'm sure that there's some Wolfpack podcast out there right now. And they do play Tennessee early in the year, but in terms of league play, like,
this could be Dave Doran's year to finally get his conference championship.
Yeah, just having taken a look at it for 2 seconds, like, that's going to be a hard team in the standings when you don't play them.
Yeah,
right.
To have to try to overcome when they seem to, from what we think of before the season starts, which doesn't necessarily always matter, obviously, but tends to be somewhat close.
Right.
Have a pretty easy road there. So, and then, of course, like, what's SMU going to do? Who knows what SMU is going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. A talented football team too. They would make an argument right up there with Virginia Tech, which, by the way, we don't play SMU for like 3 years. That's a bit of a bummer. Of all the teams we added, I want to play.
I swear to God, if SMU makes an ACC title game, I will lose my ever-loving mind.
Yeah,
be almost as funny as the year Notre Dame jumped in. Yeah.
Our fathers years before us were saying, if Virginia Tech wins the ACC championship in their first year, oh, that would be a disgrace to this great league. Go Terrapins.
Oh, Maryland.
But
hope you guys are enjoying being a doormat.
Yeah, maybe a bowl team. Maybe.
Hey, they're making a lot of money.
They are.
That's all that matters.
Oh, while we're doing this, what's the lowest bar for you to like walk away from the season happy? But what needs to be cleared is 8 wins chill. Because Ricky, you said that, and I know it was a little bit facetiously online. Like, will you be happy if they make the playoff? Which, like, it's just like when your salary increases 20%, suddenly you just want to be the guy who has a salary 20% higher than you, right? So expectations will always raise. But for Virginia Tech, a team who has won 8 games once in the last 5 years, and it was 5 years ago.
Last time they won 8 was 19.
Yeah, so 5 seasons.
I think you got to show me the 8. I know last year we were talking about this. We were talking about would 5 and 7 be acceptable? And if I remember correctly, I think Mike, was it you that said you got to show me the 5?
Yeah,
and you got to show me who they actually beat.
Right.
I think if they get to 9, it's probably a success, regardless of who they win and lose to.
Yeah.
If a team that's got this much upper class talent, you've got a quarterback you feel confident in, you've got a collection of transfers that you feel like plug some holes, you've got a receiver room that's as good as, in my opinion, it's almost as good as any in the conference. You should win 9 games.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you win 8 games. One of those 8 better be a really damn good win. Something like a at Miami or an at Clemson, or excuse me, at home against Clemson. But for me, I think as far as measuring, is this year a success? 9 wins clears the bar. 8 wins, we got to talk about it.
Yeah, it's 9 for me too. I just the 8-win scenario, it's like, all right, is one of them an upset? But then at the same time, that probably means that you lost 2 games you shouldn't have, right? Yeah. If there's an upset in there, or at least one more than you were expecting. Anything less than 9-3, given the way this roster lays out, combined with how the schedule lines up, like, you're not going to have both working out in your favor very often in a rebuild. And I still like to talk about this as a rebuild, but like, this team's so good, like, compared to where they were 2 years ago, that it's just like really hard to not get expectations up, not get your hopes up. But I think 9-3, even if, you drop 1 you shouldn't, and I'd be perfectly fine with a 9-3, honestly, even if like you go 9-3 and you split Miami and Clemson and you lost like 2 you shouldn't have, and you still go 9-3. I still think that's a reasonable outcome given where this roster is from the depth standpoint. And just the fact that we haven't seen him beat a good team yet. So I think 9-3 would be fine. 9-3 would be great, actually. 9-3
That'll
would be
change
great.
in late September, Mike, when they beat Miami.
I mean, yeah, that one. If we get to 5-0 and we have Stanford in a bye week, we're gonna need to have
This
some
podcast
conversations.
is going to tell all sorts of lies.
I can't wait. Yeah, I can't wait for that. So,
I mean, it's really just what the season is an opportunity to reintroduce Virginia Tech football to an entire generation that has no recollection of it ever being good. So to really, an average finish at this point. They're ranked 28th in the polls going into the year. So doing worse than that would be a disappointment.
Yeah.
I think that, if you finish the season ranked 20th in the country and as like a 3-loss team in the ACC, it lends credibility to what Brent Pry is trying to do in just his third year. And obviously better is better. Now, granted, if it would be if there's a litany of injuries or Drones is out for an extended period of time, and that's why they drop a game. And obviously, it's more than just a wins-loss record, right? That's why we were so excited after a 6-6 season, when after a 6-6 season, 2 years prior to that season, the coach got fired.
Right.
It's about the story that it tells and the trajectory and how the program and being associated with it, whether that be as a fan, player, what have you, how that association makes you feel as a result of how the football team's doing. It all tells a story, but a unique opportunity, perhaps sooner than we thought, to have Virginia Tech reemerge on the national scene in college football. And that opportunity that's ahead of us, I don't think it's being taken lightly by anyone. I think some of the opponents, like Georgia Tech, might be being taken lightly by certain subsects of the fan base. But at the end of the day, Virginia Tech has more credibility to them going into the season than in more than a decade, for a reason.
Yeah.
And that's because they got the players to really get this thing done in a schedule that makes it a attainable goal, if you will.
When you have a win total of 8.5 and the money is very close to even on both sides of that, that means they expect you to be pretty good. They also expect you to be right around 8 or 9 wins. Also, that's a little tell on the wagering side. I'm going to wrap because my puppy's got to go out.
Same.
I've exhausted everything I have to say. Anything else, guys?
No, looking forward to it. It'll be fun to watch some football this weekend.
Yeah, Florida State, Georgia Tech. Who you guys got? SMU is a 27-point favorite over Nevada, so I think they'll probably win that one. But
give me SMU to cover.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, what's the line on Florida State and Georgia Tech?
I've seen it at 10.5, and I've also seen it at 11. Like in the last couple days, it was at one point Florida State at 12.
This is the Ireland game, right?
It's the Ireland game, correct?
Yeah. Man, if it's 11, I'll take Georgia Tech with the points.
Give me Georgia Tech. These are our first official ACC picks, Mike. So you got to. I need answers from both of you. We're keeping track this year. It's Scott's job. Scott, you say you want to produce? There you go, buddy.
There you go. You have your in. You get to keep our records. I got Georgia Tech. If it gets under, if it gets to like 10, then you start getting the single digits. I'm taking Florida State, but Georgia Tech. Just inside 2 touchdowns. Yeah, give me the Jackets. And SMU on a cover easily against Nevada. That's going to be ugly for the non-ACC Wolfpack. We'll put it that way.
Hey, and because we only have 2 games to pick, I want to pick one more. FCS Montana State on the road at New Mexico. Montana State, 10.5-point favorites. Who do you like?
New Mexico is so bad. Give me Montana State.
Who gives a shit? That's what I'm picking.
It counts. It counts. You can't not pick.
Oh, Montana
Give me,
State.
yeah, I guess I'll take Montana State. I don't know anything about either of those teams, but sure, why not?
Well, we'll go across the board with Montana State. So the game really doesn't mean anything in our overall records, but tough times in Albuquerque.
I'll say. Rate, review, subscribe. YouTube.com/@Hokie Hangover Podcast. Please subscribe there. We're trying to grow the video platform. Haven't done that to date, and we started that up with the Brent Pry interview back in the spring, but we want to make sure we get that rolling. So please go subscribe there.
Didn't even tell people we had it until today.
Just dropped it. So anyway, all right, guys.
All right,
good.
Later, boys.
All right, go Hokies.